Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Just to start off, the speakers have no disclosures here. My name is Michelle Deloison-Baum. I'm an MBA MPH student at Yale and one of the organizing committee members for the conference. We have an awesome, diverse group of panelists today, and I'm really excited for the conversation around women's mental health tech. All of our panelists have a long list of really impressive accomplishments, but I'm going to keep intros really brief to give everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves. First, we have Sofia Noori, Chief Resident of Digital Psychiatry at the Yale Department of Psychiatry and one of the co-founders of the conference. Next, Maria Velissaris, founding partner of SteelSky Ventures, a women's health tech venture fund. Next, we have Ariel Richer, co-founder and director of research and advocacy for the Urban Indigenous Collective and co-creator of Shock Talk, an app to match Indigenous people with Indigenous therapists. And finally, Christina Safran, CEO of Equip, a startup with a virtual program with wraparound support for recovery from eating disorders. I'll now open it up to the panelists for the opportunity to tell your story and what has motivated you to do the work that you do. Sofia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sofia. I am a fourth-year psychiatry resident in the Yale Department of Psychiatry, and I am also co-leader of this conference. I'm also the chief resident of digital psychiatry and the chief resident of quality improvement here at the Yale Department of Psychiatry. And my work is with digital mental health companies and also with strengthening the relationships between clinicians and with startups and entrepreneurship. So I helped to develop the curriculum for a program called Innovation to Impact, which is a NIDA-funded substance use entrepreneurship program. And in that program, we take clinicians and academicians and actually teach them how to become entrepreneurs because they're the people with the clinical insights that can most effectively help. So that is sort of, I've worked with a number of startups in a consulting role as well. I've worked at Lyra Health when they were first very small. Now they're very, very large. And with a number of other startups. And I'm currently also working on my own venture and I'm just really happy to be here today. Thanks for the opportunity, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Sofia. Maria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Maria Velissaris. I'm the founding partner of SteelSky Ventures, and we invest in women's health companies. And so we invest in any companies that create better access, care, or outcomes in women's health care. We are really excited to be here today. One of the themes that for our investment thesis is mental health, specifically maternal mental health, and also addressing disparities around racial and ethnic parity in healthcare. And so this is a very amazing panel to be talking to about these with some of the solution providers right on the panel. So really excited for the discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. Ariel, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi, thank you for having me here today. My name is Ariel Richer. I'm Afro-Indigenous and white. I am actually, it says that I'm the Director of Research and Advocacy for Urban Indigenous Collective, but as of June 1st, I will be taking over as the CEO. I'm also one of the co-founders, so it's been a big month of transition. I'll be taking over. I'm also the co-founder and director of research for Shock Talk, which you mentioned is a mental health app to connect Indigenous folks with Indigenous mental health providers. I think I can give a little bit more background of myself when we get into some of the other questions, but I'm just really excited to be on this awesome panel today.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Christina, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Thrilled to be here today. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Safran. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Equip Health. We're the first real digital platform for recovery from eating disorders. And we essentially partner with health plans to expand access. That's really at our North Star, and build families right now with that expanded definition of adolescents ages 6 to 24, a fully virtual care team of a therapist, dietitian, MD, peer mentor, and family mentor, deliver up to a year of wraparound fully virtual care and hopefully get folks better and keep them better for a fraction of the cost of the traditional model. Came to this work through my own personal experience. I was diagnosed with anorexia at 10 years old, struggled throughout my adolescence. At 15 in my own recovery, started a nonprofit, Project Heal, upon learning that 80% of the 30 million Americans with eating disorders don't get treatment. I said, this is horrible, have to do something about it. Project HEAL is still active and thriving, and I'm a member of the board of directors, but really the catalyst for moving over to start Equip was seeing over the last 2 decades that our research has improved dramatically. We have evidence-based outpatient treatments that work quite well, and simultaneously pretty horrifying to see that those were not making their way out of academia to get to folks, and more people had access to facility-based care that was expensive and ineffective and no quality outpatient care. So after years of plugging holes in a broken system, said, think I know the system needs to exist, think we need to build it. And it's been a really exciting 2 years, especially with the tailwinds that COVID has given us. Really excited to be here and be part of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm really excited for the conversation today. Just to kick us off, we have a really diverse audience here in terms of knowledge about mental health and technology. So to get us on the same page as we start out the conversation, I'd love to ask the question, what is women's mental health tech and what does it mean to you? Maria, would you like to start us off with that?
Sure. Well, to me, women's mental health tech, it's really just about women being able to go through life with some peace of mind. We have so many stresses in our life, and I think that we're just looking for ways to calm the anxiety, calm the voices in our head, and be able to get through the day without, fear and anxiety. And I know, especially in ethnic communities, it's even more triggering with all of the events. And so to have that extra layer of added stress, you're already, a woman who has a lot of stresses, and then you add on layers of social injustice, and, and that those things are really catalysts to drive, mental illness and in those communities.
Thank you, Maria. Does anyone else want to add on to that? Sofia, maybe.
Yeah, I would be happy to. I get asked a lot, especially in healthcare circles, like what is digital health? What is health tech, right? And then what is mental health tech? What is women's mental health tech, right? And I guess at the core of it, I defined health tech as any sort of tech-enabled solution that improves health, right? And this can include things like telehealth. It can include things like literally like a text-based hotline, like crisis text line. I consider that part of health tech and digital health. And that's like the very much less tech, but it has a component of tech, right? And then to things like what Christina does at Equip, which is, a family-based treatment model that does use telehealth and some tech-enabled features like maybe apps, things that are computerized or available by mobile apps, but help provide the same materials and skills. And then on the far end, there's also digital therapeutics, right? Like apps that actually have been proven to improve health outcomes by themselves. And that wouldn't exist if there wasn't a virtual or app format to use. And that's probably at like the more cutting edge part of digital health. And so when I think about what women's mental health tech is, it's really using tech-enabled solutions to improve women's mental health. Whether that is maternal mental health, like Maria was talking about, or eating disorders, like Christina's talking about, or Indigenous women's mental health, like what Ariel does.
Awesome. Thank you both for framing up the conversation. So mental health tech is a growing space with increasing funding, attention, and innovation in recent times, especially in light of the pandemic. With women's mental health tech as an emerging space, we have the opportunity to design a new system that's more inclusive and equitable. During today's panel, I'd like to focus our discussion around the question, how might we design women's mental health tech and leverage technology to reduce disparities? So I'd love to hear from our recent founders first. Ariel, would you like to tell us about how did you go about designing technology to be trauma-informed, disparity reducing, and culturally competent? How does technology facilitate accessibility and equity in the services that you offer? This is for Josh.
Thank you. Yes. So I think I left out a little bit of my background there. So part of, as Native and Indigenous folks, one of the first ways that we introduce ourselves is where we come from, who we are. I learned about my indigeneity much later in life. I like to be very open about that. I was about 24, and my mom just casually drops, "Oh, I remember our Venezuelan grandmother speaking our Indigenous language." At the time, I was already working for the Administration for Native Americans in DC. So I had this connection. I was doing the work. I was working as a program evaluator. I had just graduated from Columbia with my master's in social work, realized I can take social work values and use it as a program evaluator. No one wanted me to be their therapist. It's like direct practice was not going to be for me, which was fine. But that has shaped how I think about mental health, how I think about delivering services, especially being on the program evaluation side. So then I was there for about 2 years. 2018, I made my way back to Columbia for the PhD program at School of Social Work. I was able to use what I learned from being able to access and conduct visits and write congressional reports across all, basically what we call Indian country, but across a variety of Native communities and American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, Northern Mariana Islands, and just seeing what the disparities, the gaps in information, the gaps in services. And on my visits, I would get to speak with people all day. They would be very long, grueling days because 12 hours of interviewing folks, but learning kind of what those gaps are, what's happening in their community-based programs, because that was the type of funding that ANA did. So then my research has focused on the intersection of intimate partner violence and intergenerational trauma, drug and alcohol misuse, and substance use disorders, as well as HIV and STI risks. I say all this because this all does fuel how we thought about Shock Talk and kind of this genesis of this app. My advisor, I had no advisors who were Native. I didn't have that representation. I'm the only Native graduate student in my department. There's 2 MSW students. I've taken them on as interns because I said, hey, are there any Indigenous students here? And I knew the importance of that. And then my advisor introduced me to our current CEO, Sutton King. She's Menominee and Oneida. She's also Afro-Indigenous. So learning the words to use, the language around talking about my descent and who I am was really helpful. And within 3 months, we had founded Urban Indigenous Collective because we saw that there was a gap in services in New York City. Part of treaty rights is IHS, Indian Health Service, is supposed to provide healthcare, which is different than health insurance. I kind of separated that veterans get health insurance, Natives get health care. So the meaning of that is that we have to go to a healthcare, an IHS facility, or an urban Indian program. Almost 80% of Natives live in urban areas, however, but most of the research is done, the research and the services are provided for people who live in reservations or on reservations or in more rural areas. So less than 1 in 4 Native folks have access to an urban Indian health program in a city. And New York City has the most Natives out of any other metropolitan area. So we're like, this is a huge gap. We also understand that we didn't want to kind of play into pan-Indianism where we have these themes where we talk about Native, that just covers everybody, because we are a diverse group of people. If we talk about federally recognized folks, that's upwards of 580 tribes, but not to mention not unrecognized tribes, the state recognized tribes. So as I'm talking about this, I know this sounds long, but as we start thinking about how we were going to provide services, last summer we spoke with about 50 individuals who are Native living in urban areas, talked about, what's important to you. It was language, having an understanding of generational and intergenerational trauma, not having to explain to your therapist all the things, because if you are doing this huge information dump before you can even get to why you came to therapy or why you sought these resources, it was re-traumatizing you. We also wanted to break from this whole fail fast, lean startup. That may work for some other tech solutions, but when it comes to trauma informed and when it comes to mental health, that just didn't seem ethical. It wasn't relational. Kinship is really important across a variety of Indigenous communities. So we have an AI platform. So we're in our beta. So I don't know the tech terms. We have Austin Serio, who's our CEO of Shock Talk, but we work together very well because he knows you do this and he programs and does this. So I just say, hey, it would be really cool if we could be more relational in this area. So we have an AI platform called Shocko, which is named after his traditional language. He's Shakur and Shakari. So even from the name of Shock Talk, not to be confused with the alcohol Shock Talk. So I do like to throw that out there, but it is Shock Talk, and that's where the name comes from. So just even infusing it in these little areas, having the ability to say that you want to speak with someone who's also an elder. Elders are really important within a variety of Indigenous communities. And the last point I'll say, because I know I have been talking a lot, was so there's the initial AI, you can get that instant response. So no matter what time of day it is, because we are a pretty lean staff. Well, we aren't a lean startup, we are a very lean staff right now, and we are working on funding. So they can get, just those initial questions, and then it automatically sets up an appointment with our intake coordinator so that there's still that relational aspect that you can speak with somebody and really find that best fit there. We are still in the process of having a lot of human interaction just because we are still refining that matching process. So that's kind of where we are right now. And at the end of the day, it's just kinship, relationship, understanding that our clients are also our relatives. And not necessarily like blood relatives, but when we talk about being a good relative, it also goes into our business model. That's why Shock Talk is our for-profit and UIC is our nonprofit. UIC owns shares of Shock Talk because we knew that we are going to invest back into our own communities, and that there's already value already built in there. So that's why we didn't go everything part of UIC. So
Awesome.
Thank you for allowing me to share all of that.
Thank you so much for sharing. Kristina, would you like to tell us how you've worked to make Equip more culturally competent and disparity reducing?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, just to ground everyone in sort of the disparities in eating disorder care, there are many. So 30 million Americans suffer with an eating disorder at some point in their lifetime. It's about 10% of the population, about 5 million Americans each year. There's still a horrible misconception that this is a white rich girl vanity issue, only affects people who look like me, when in fact eating disorders affect people pretty equally across race, class, ethnicity. We know a third of sufferers are men. Most people with eating disorders are not underweight. You really can't tell just by looking at them. There's very compelling new data that as the level of food insecurity rises in a community, the levels of eating disorders directly rise, very relevant for COVID. And unfortunately, right now, 80% of the 30 million Americans don't get any treatment. Obviously, it tends to be more of these marginalized groups who have the most trouble accessing treatment. And so when we think about access, we think about it amongst three different spectrums. One, diagnosis, right? How are we making sure that everyone is getting diagnosed? Right now, if you're a 15-year-old cisgendered, white, thin, upper middle class female and you go into a pediatrician's office, you might get diagnosed with an eating disorder. You might not, but you have maybe a chance. If you're any of those groups I mentioned, you have a very, very, very low chance of getting diagnosed with an eating disorder. And actually, most folks aren't diagnosed until 3 years into their illness, obviously making it much harder to get on the path to recovery. So we try to do a lot of work in educating health plans on what eating disorders are, who they affect, what they look like, at educating pediatricians on how to identify them, what are the questions to ask, educating, schools, coaches, et cetera. How do we increase that diagnosis gap? Then we think about access, right? This was obviously, the issue that I've been working on for my entire life, realizing that 80% of the 3 million Americans don't get treatment. Started, really focusing on financial aspect, the fact that most insurance companies didn't cover eating disorder treatment, out-of-pocket costs for eating disorders could be upwards of $45,000 per month, making it incredibly inaccessible for folks. So always knowing, my initial attempt was to raise money for people who couldn't afford treatment, and I've moved over to thinking about how do we really partner with health plans and health systems, like commercial plans, Medicare, Medicaid, to really educate them on the importance of this coverage, and that folks, with proper treatment can go on to reach full recovery. And then finally, how do we make sure that care is culturally confident and safe and effective for the people that we are treating, right? So maybe we'll touch on, efficacy in terms of evidence-based treatment for eating disorders a little bit later. But in terms of cultural competency, it was incredibly important to us to make sure that our providers really can identify with the lived experience of folks with eating disorders. Unfortunately, we've had a system in which there's already a huge shortage of eating disorder outpatient specialists. Even amongst those who call themselves specialists, very few participate in evidence-based treatment. And then on top of that, with all of that, because of how inaccessible training in evidence-based treatment for eating disorders has been, right? You have to graduate college, go on to get your master's in social work, and then pay an additional many thousands of dollars, travel somewhere to get training in eating disorders. You end up with a field of a lot of people who look like me, right? When the majority of clients who don't look like me. And so part of what Equip wants to do is say, let's flip this model on its head. Let's actually go out and recruit strong behaviorally oriented providers who share lived experiences with the populations that we're treating. Let's pay them to get trained in evidence-based treatment. Let's pay them to get supervision. And so we've been really proud of our ability to do that, and also really want to make sure, and we've done incredible work and still are working to continue to do this, but making sure that all families who come to us have at least one member of their care team who really matches or can resonate with their lived experience. And so right now, anybody who comes to Equip today can have at least one member of their care team who has experience as Spanish speaking. We have representation from BIPOC communities. We have representation, actually one family mentor who was homeless while we're helping her daughter to recover from an eating disorder. We have transgender peer mentors, family mentors, and providers. We have providers in larger bodies, which are huge things for eating disorders. The majority of people with eating disorders are not underweight, and we have male identifying mentors as well. So really excited that we are able to, say to patients and families, we have someone who can really relate to you. And in treatment, we see this make a huge difference, right? Actually, ARFID is kind of the newest diagnosis in the DSM for eating disorders. It stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And just yesterday, I was reading one of the comments from one of our patients, and she just wrote in saying it's really incredible to be able to have a peer mentor who I've never met anybody who had ARFID, and to have someone who really shares my experience is so meaningful. And so we really make sure to be able to do that, especially as a company founded by, two white, thin women who do meet the stereotype. We knew it was incredibly important to surround ourselves with not only, staff and providers, but also advisors from the very beginning who could really speak to those experiences.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristina. Sofia, I'm curious to hear how you think about making mental health technology trauma-informed and disparity reducing.
Yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts about this, but I'm going to try to make it brief because I'm sure that Maria also has lots of thoughts. So I mean, I think Ariel and Kristina hit a lot of this on the head already. I will say that it does, a lot of it comes from recruiting people who have lived experience, who have taken care of these people directly, right? And also making sure that we have an opportunity as like this field is still burgeoning and developing, to make sure that we are, using our funds and referring patients to the companies that do provide trauma-informed and sensitive care, like to Ariel's company or Kristina's, right? And I also want to shout out to people who I think are really shaping this field more. Andre Blackman from Onboard Health. So that company helps place people of diverse backgrounds into digital health companies. For the specific reason of making sure that there's people who are representative of the general population, right? And that's amazing work. There's also another person named Solomon Tibibu, who also is a big champion for reducing health disparities, making sure that mental health tech becomes a more diverse, is diverse, right? So I think that has to happen from the get-go. And that's also why we're having this talk here. So those are a couple of my things. I will also say that I think that there's not enough placed on UX design and making it trauma informed. And I hope that that field also becomes much more trauma informed and trauma focused, because for us to design really good mental health tech, it has to be trauma informed. And there's really not that many best practices about that have been published yet.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. And Maria, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well. And also, given your more like macro view of the industry, I'd love to hear about, new diverse founders who are innovating in mental health specific to their communities and areas that you're particularly excited about.
Well, I love that all these founders in the room right now are talking about culturally competent care, because no matter what company we're investing in women's health company, in the back of our head, number one is, how are you addressing the populations, not only culturally ethnic diverse populations, but socioeconomic? How are you informing your Medicaid strategy, Medicare? And I think that's really important, because access is really important, especially for the most vulnerable communities. They don't have access. They can't always get a ride to the hospital, or take off time from work, or find a babysitter for their kids. So almost every company that we look at, every company we invest in is women's health related. But what we found was, there's a layer of social determinant of health that includes mental health that needs to be applied across all of these companies. So no longer is there just one place that you can go to access these things. We have a company that we invested in that's basically a doula matching platform for underserved communities, Black and Hispanic women, because we're trying to reduce the maternal mortality issue. And what we realized is one of the biggest issues is maternal health. A third of these women are going to be diagnosed with postpartum depression. How can we get information about this earlier? How can we start treating them? And how can we serve them where they need care? Because I said they can't always get to the provider. So that's why we are using telemedicine, we're using at-home services in order to reach these populations. So I think that's what is really important, not to really always think of mental health as just an app, one tool that you use, but how do we overlay it and think about it in all types of companies, in all types of healthcare treatments?
Awesome. Thank you. And are there any other additional organizations or areas that you're particularly excited? Anyone can answer, but I'd love to hear from Maria, especially, that you're particularly excited about who have been doing this kind of work.
Well, I think Lark is a good one. They're kind of like an AI chronic care platform. People with chronic disease have a lot of, depression as well. And so I love how they're just creating new indications. They're going to be thinking about creating a postpartum indication. And I'm really wanting to push people into this maternal health, and also cultural competent care for counseling and psychiatry, because less than 5% of psychologists, psychiatrists are Black. And so that's really hard for our communities as we try to find people that can match our experience and our social and cultural norms. So it's, how do we get more people in the field? Because it's not only going to be race-based, but people that can just understand and maybe not, apply biases to you, but how do we train other people? Because we can't always just be matched with somebody of our race. How can we pair other people and make sure that they can deliver culturally competent services when they aren't the same? And I think that's a challenge. I think that is something that I would love to see addressed. And I would love, Kristina or Ariel, if you have seen anything like this in the field. I know I haven't, but I feel like that might be a gap in the market that could be very, very valuable to the field.
I'm so glad you brought that up. It is, as we grow, so we're definitely starting small with our therapists who do identify as Indigenous, but as we already have a question for, like, as we get farther along in our growth, is, do you want to speak with someone who is Indigenous, or would you like to speak with someone who has an understanding from what we've identified of, like, what are the most important things? And a lot of it is that experience of intergenerational trauma, just knowing, basically, so you don't have to retell your story, and you can just start off where, like, what is the thing that brought you there? So that is definitely something that is top of mind for us, because, with Indigenous folks, the percentage across the US is pretty small, or it may seem small. So Also, there are less therapists, so we're not always going to be able to find someone. Also, within Indigenous communities, sometimes you don't want somebody who is specifically from your community. You're going to have to go outside of it just because some of the tribes and the different communities are so small. So there is that aspect that we do have to kind of deal with, but then you shouldn't have to choose like, oh, I either get someone who is in my tribe or is Indigenous, but like there should be more choices. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great conversation. And I think that we've tried to kind of shift from this definition of cultural competency to cultural humility, understanding that sort of like the more you know, the more that you realize that you just have so much more to learn, and you can never be 100% competent at, you know, any culture that, frankly, any culture that you do exist in or don't exist in, but we can all have cultural humility. And so we place a huge emphasis on trainings, and we bring in folks with lived experience of different, you know, lived experience of eating disorders to educate us on that. But yeah, it's incredibly true. And I mean, there were definitely some questions as we brought in, you know, peer mentors who had strong identification with other communities. And I'll say transparently, like, it was incredibly important to us. We know that the transgender community experiences eating disorders at exponentially higher rates than their cisgender counterparts, and don't have access to treatment. And so we have 2 transgender mentors on our working with us right now. And, you know, there was a question about, and we actually did have one parent who said, you know, I don't want my kind of cisgender 13-year-old working with a transgender male identifying mentor. We had only one parent who expressed something, and the 13-year-old said, I love working with my mentor, and I don't want to change. And that was really the only experience we had. And the relationship has gone on to be really, really beautiful. And similarly, we've had experiences where somebody is matched with a mentor who, you know, meets their cultural identity, but for other reasons, they decide that they really identify with a different mentor and end up changing mentors. And so I think it's been, we're at the very beginning of our learning journey, and I'm really excited to learn from other founders and companies who've done this sort of matching. But I think it really does start with that cultural humility and ensuring that everybody in your organization places that as a strong value.
In just listening to those last 2 comments, I want to ask a question to Sofia. Sofia, we're trying to solve the problem after it's already done, right? Is there a way to start having this kind of training in school? And is this a type of training that they're offering in your programs? Because if we can tackle this situation when people are in medical school, so that when they graduate, we don't have to have all of these startups trying to address culturally competent care. The doctors can just provide it inherently. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Maria. Thanks for this question. Yeah, because I have so many thoughts on this. First, so let me gather myself. So one thing I'm also struck by is, like, in the keynote, Tarana Burke was also talking about, like, you know, culturally competent and cultural humility. And then she was like, you know, we need to be culturally responsible, and we need to be like recruiting people into these caring professions who like come in like knowing that they have this responsibility to also get training in this way. And I will say that I think medical school has for so long been such an ivory tower, right? And it has been changing slowly but surely. Like when I was a medical student at UC San Francisco, we had full day workshops on how you can be trans affirming when you're taking care of trans patients. I will also say my psychiatry residency, we have a specific track called the Social Justice and Health Equity track, where we actually go to communities nearby that are underserved, and we learn about how people live there. We literally go to people's houses and things like that, and check out the different organizations there that actually serve the can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, you're back.
Okay, thanks. Stephanie is right next to me, and she was like, "We can't hear you," so just wanted to double check. And then in terms of like the high need areas, so I've landscaped a lot of different areas in mental health, and it's really like, and there's so many. First of all of mental health is underserved. And I think all of us can agree on that, right? And then there are places that are like even more high cost and high need with like very low with that are very low resourced. Some of these things are like chronic pain. I think chronic pain is part of mental health, frankly, like fibromyalgia, where people experience really real pain, but it's discounted by healthcare a lot of the time, and it's disproportionately women, right? I also think that there's an opportunity for faith-based mental health services. That's already happening, right? But like people talk to their pastors and to their like spiritual leaders, right? But there aren't any companies that are specifically identifying that and trying to like standardize the care through faith-based organizations as much. And I could go on and on and on about other parts of healthcare, of mental health care that need help.
I have one follow-up question on that. Sorry, Michelle, I'm taking your job, but there was one point that you made, Sophia, that I thought was really interesting, and it was talking about the class that you took. That was an elective class, right? Where you got to opt in, or is it a mandatory class that everybody takes?
You mean the social justice health equity thing? That is mandatory.
Okay, it is mandatory.
Yeah. And I think it's great that it's mandatory because those things can't be optional, because it's only people who see it as a problem who come.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was saying. Are they just preaching to the choir, or do we have the people that really need to be there and really understand how to work with other cultures? So that's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. And then just to also, sorry, now we're just having a discussion, Maria, but the other thing too is like, there's a whole problem with who actually becomes healthcare professionals, right? Like in medical school, like 80% of my class is from the top 1% of families. Of family wealth, right? And so there's a huge disconnect between who has the power, right? And I think that's another place where tech actually has a lot of promise, is that it can also level the playing field in training people better, like what Kristina was saying too, how you actually invest in training people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have another question that's kind of like the flip side of this, which, we've talked now about how technology can be used to address some of these barriers and disparities, but I'm also curious what limitations there are to tech-enabled platforms, and how might we address some of the barriers, like the digital divide. I'm open to anyone jumping in, but I know, Ariel, you were curious about this one, so maybe you can start us off.
I love that. I love how Sophia framed it in the beginning on this spectrum of whether it's like tech enabled and even, highlighting text-based or telephone or like telemental health. Within, like, that's the first thing that we realized within our community. Even when we did our interviews last summer, it was people who had access to the internet platforms we were on. It was folks who had access to navigate the different video streaming platforms or like Zoom or something like that. So with that divide, I think as long as we don't put all of the emphasis on it must be done through technology, it is an aid. But at the end of the day, it is that relationship that you have between that therapeutic relationship. So I don't really have the full answer, but it is more of a philosophy and a way of approaching it so that we don't lose that. And it's really, you also mentioned, trauma-informed UX designers. Again, UX is something that I only learned a year and a half ago through our CEO. And what's really helped is that we have such a respectful relationship. Everything, Kristina, we also talk about cultural humility. Everyone within our organization right now is Indigenous identifying, which is fantastic. And we keep on getting new interns because they hear, oh, you are the one organization or the one company that is Indigenous led. So that is really important. But with this digital divide, I think just being prepared to serve folks where they are. I think it's something that we are exploring as we have different funding with, we're also interested in Medicaid and Medicare, and making sure that if someone does need to drop off a video platform, that it's going to be covered through the voice aspect. I mean, I'm going to be honest and share my experience. Finding a psychiatrist last year was just so incredibly hard to find someone, and someone that I could afford, someone that wasn't going to take me 8 weeks out when I was having a crisis at that moment. like getting a phone call saying it was going to cost me $800 as I'm walking to my class. But she's been able to work with me that, okay, I just need to see you on the video for a moment, and then we can switch to phone and as I was traveling because of COVID, different things were changing. So for us right now, it's really this approach that we're taking, that technology is not going to be the end all be all, but it can really be helpful. And I love the way you're approaching it, Christina, with this wraparound services. It's very, very holistic. And I'm just pointing out all the things that I'm excited to connect with y'all after this. I have this whole list of things that we're all going to talk about afterwards.
The feeling is very mutual. So a couple of thoughts on this. One, it was always incredibly important to me. I've always been focused on access, and I've always been skeptical that technology alone, technology can do a lot of things, but I didn't think technology alone could solve the eating disorder recovery problem, especially because eating disorders are an illness in which not knowing how sick you are and not wanting to get better is a core part of the illness. And I think about a lot of mental illnesses, like these are illnesses that thrive in isolation, that thrive in secrecy. And so it's so important to bring in community, to bring in people who've been where you've been and can say, I get it, I've been there, I know how hard this is, and keep going. It's worth it. It's worth all the hard work, and you can get there. I think that's really, I tend to say our peer mentors and our family mentors are the secret sauce of Equip. I also think that, pointing out the obvious, obviously technology can't reduce barriers if you don't have a device, if you don't have internet, right? And so that's one thing that we do, especially as we're going on to work with Medicaid plans, is making sure that we send participants technology devices. We can send them a hotspot. We have, folks who speak their language amongst our provider base. And then finally, something that my co-founder actually loves to talk about. My co-founder is a PhD clinical psychologist, and I think that combination of someone with fantastic clinical expertise plus the lived experience is a real reason that Equip has been so successful. But she talks a lot about expanding access can only go so far in the absence of quality. And actually, in some ways, expanding access may have sort of some unintended consequences, especially when it comes to mental health, if it's not quality. And this is obviously one of the reasons that I transitioned over from Project Heal to Equip after trying to get more and more people access to treatment that I later learned didn't necessarily work. I think what happens in mental health care is that there's a difference between treatment that feels good and treatment that works. And oftentimes the treatment that works really doesn't feel good. Eating disorders are definitely case in point of that. Good treatment is really, really, really hard. And there are a lot of treatments that feel really good, right? The more eclectic, like I'm going to sit with you in a room and I'm going to be a great listener and I'm going to validate your feelings. And all of that feels really good, but it doesn't actually work. And so when you leave the session, you think, and you don't get better from your depression, your PTSD, your eating disorder, you think, I'm broken, right? Like it's my fault. I'm too sick to get better. It couldn't be that nice, warm therapist, Christina, who's validating and empathizing. Like I must be the problem. And I think that is a huge problem that I worry about as there is this proliferation of more and more technology without really assessing quality.
Thank you. I want to move the conversation forward to another important topic, which is the resources and financing that it takes to get these projects off the ground. According to Project Diane, only 0.64% of VC funding went to Black and Latinx women founders in 2018 and 2019, and only 2.7% went to women-only founding teams in 2019. Maria, as the venture partner for a VC fund, or the founding partner for a VC fund, I'm curious to hear your perspective on how we can increase the amount of funding and resources for BIPOC and women-founded health startups. And polling, actually, one of our audience members, Colette Ellis, also wants to ask how to best pitch our culturally competent digital mental health app to investors who might not fully recognize the need for such solutions. So if you have any advice for how founders might be pitching this as a value, I think our audience would be very curious to hear about that as well.
Happy to address both. I'll start with your first question. So how can we get more money flowing into the hands of these founders? Number one, we need more female investors. That's number one. There's been data to show that, every dollar that is given to a woman fund manager, there'll be, an X amount that goes into a female founded company. And we just need more. There's only, for me, that I'm 0.06 of Black women VCs. Women overall are less than 7% of venture capitalists. And a lot of times they're at institutions run by men who don't understand, and they don't get to bring up companies that they really want to fund. They get shut down because they don't manage the VC fund. So that's why people like myself are like, you know what? I'm going to go start my own so I can fund the people who I want to fund. And so I think that's number one. We need to, as a group, collectively think about how we can get more money in the hands of women venture capitalists and BIPOC venture capitalists. And that is the quickest way that we're going to be able to get more equitable capital distribution. Number two, women's health specifically, a lot of men don't understand what is incontinence, what is postpartum depression, anorexia. They're like, oh yeah, exactly, that's a teen girl thing. They don't understand our unique issues, and they don't know how to solve them. So they actually don't know how to invest in them. If they don't know the problems and they don't want to figure them out, it's really hard for them to invest in it. But what I will say, they all, and this is to the second point in the question from the room, is they all understand money. They all understand returns, and that's how you need to talk to them. I think as we are so excited and passionate about healthcare and changing the world and doing great things, they're more concerned on the line going up like that in your chart. So I would focus less on explaining what the tech is, explaining it, and more on, this is the business model, this is how it makes money, and this is how I'm going to return you $1 billion company. That's really what these investors want to hear at the end of the day. It doesn't actually matter so much as long as you're kind of in their wheelhouse. So if it's a healthcare company, if it's a digital health, if it's a fintech, if it's a crypto, all people want to hear is how they're going to make money. And so if you can focus a little bit more on that, know your unit economics, know your market sizes, know your total addressable market. Those are the things I think female founders fall down on, and people of color. They don't know the financials as much as they need to. They'll sometimes say, oh, our CFO knows that, or I don't have that information, that person knows that. But when you come into a room, you have to know your financials so that people can trust you. You're already coming in, 2 shots down from everyone else, right? You're already knocked down, 1, because you're a woman, 2, because you may be a person of color, and 3, because they don't know what this solution is that you have. So this is why you have to level the playing field and say, listen, whether you believe PCOS is a thing, whether you believe mental health is real, what you should know is the returns on this are going to be real. We're serving a huge population of people with this amount of money. They're going to pay this price, and this is what you're going to get.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think that's really awesome practical advice. Christina, you just raised a $13 million Series A round for Equip in February. I'm curious to hear about what your fundraising experience was like and what it was like pitching Equip and mental health as a value to investors.
Yeah, it was, well, one, I will say that being in the nonprofit field for 10 years before that was definitely a benefit. I had become a full-time fundraiser, and so that was a skill set that I had a lot of time to hone and develop. And I think I totally echo everything that Maria said. And what I'll add is that don't forget about the story, right? And I think that is one of the reasons that I was so successful, is because, I really led with my own personal story, my own personal experience of recovery from anorexia, and then 15 years in the field of, having all these collective stories of thousands of patients and families and these rich experiences. And I, of course, there are a number of founders, the majority, the investors rather, who were like, what is this? Eating disorders are like a rich white teenage girl problem. The market size isn't big enough, right? That was probably the one biggest thing that we got question marks on. And a lot of people would go in skeptical, but I will say with many of them, we would share the stats, we would share the market size, and then we would share the stories of how people's lives had been affected. I mean, eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate. And I got to bring in stories of, not only people who died of this illness, people who had the opportunity to go on to live a productive, successful life just like me, and just didn't have access to proper treatment and literally lost their lives. And then on the flip side, people that I will say I was in treatment with now 15 years ago who are still cycling in and out of ineffective, expensive residential care facilities, never got access to residential treatment. And so their opportunity to recover is just so much more limited. And it's interesting because I found this with both investors and also with health plans, frankly. I face the same conversation if I go into health plans, especially Medicaid, and they're like, this is not my population. Like, this is not a problem here. And we're like, okay, let me actually tell you about some of the stories of patients and families. And by the end of the conversation, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh my God, that's my son. That's my daughter. That was my sister, right? And so it was actually a really exciting opportunity. I see the educational component as huge, and I think stories are really how to grip people. You got to have the facts, you got to have the stats, but if you don't have the heart and the stories, then it'll only go so far.
Thank you so much, Christina. And Ariel, would you like to tell us about what it's been like fundraising and obtaining resources for UIC and Shock Talk?
Sure. It is just exactly what Maria said about having the stats and having the numbers. I definitely understand it's very important. And I mentioned earlier that I'm, transitioning my position within UIC, and even just here realizing that I need to kind of step up what I'm doing in Shock Talk to be able to speak more to our market size, because we have gotten those questions also from Medicaid, like, oh, how many people are there really? But it kind of rests on that IHS, Indian Health Service, that requirement that there are so many folks who are on, who fall within that realm. And even now I'm thinking like, oh, I don't even have the numbers to speak about because I am transitioning positions. Next week is our transition time. So I'm going to be learning a little bit more about the financial side of Shock Talk. But just to give you a landscape of what's happening with, so like the federal government has allotted $6.2 billion to Indian Health Service. Of that 6.2 billion, only 50 million has been allocated to urban Indian health programs. So quick math, that's less than 1%. And that would be, kind of our service area where we are located. This is, as I mentioned earlier, upwards to, 70 to 80% of natives live in urban areas, not on reservations. So then they're not having access to these urban Indian health programs. So one area that we are hoping to expand into is becoming an urban Indian health program ourselves through UIC, through the nonprofit side. It is also incredibly tactful, or it's interesting having to be part of a profit and a for-profit and a nonprofit company. And I'm trying to figure out how to navigate those different conversations. We do have a series of conversations coming up this summer. I'm just trying to figure out how much I should be sharing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we're starting to run low on time. I just want to open up for one final question. So sorry to cut you off, but you'll have a chance to say one more time. I can't believe we're almost at time, but I want to open up to kind of a final closing question. And if we can just do a quick, like every panelist share, what do you want the future of women's mental health tech to look like? And are there areas where you would like to see more innovation and that you're particularly excited about? We're low on time, but would love to hear from everyone. If you want to kick us off, Maria, and then whoever wants to jump in after.
3 real quick ones. I want to have more innovation around postpartum and mental health, more innovation around menopausal. You completely discarded once you reach menopause in the healthcare community. And number 3, I think it's really important, again, ethnic diversity and gender equity in healthcare. And those are some areas that I think are very ripe for disruption. And I think there's a lot of energy in the space to get these kinds of innovations in the market.
Awesome. Thank you. Sophia, I'm just going to call on people.
No worries. Yeah, I think I gave a lot of thoughts already about like areas that I thought could need more disruption and innovation. I guess I would say that I want women's mental health tech to be very much like a for us by us sort of space, where like the people who are building in this space also are the people who like really understand the problems and feel them and maybe have lived them themselves, And also I want it to be a space where And I think there's been sort of a gold rush into health tech that started maybe like 5 or 7 years ago, right? Where people thought that they were going to become billionaires because of this, right? And as Ariel said before, like fail fast or whatever, fail often, that doesn't work in healthcare. It might work in tech. It doesn't work in healthcare. And this is health tech, and the health comes first, literally, you know? And so, and I guess I just want it to be a space where like profits, it's not profits over people. And you can build really, really large healthcare companies by going like only cash pay, right? And become like $1 billion unicorn. But is that really what healthcare is about? I think it's important to work within systems like Kristina and Ariel have said, because not everybody can pay out of pocket. Like, you know, like some people are on Medicaid. How about them? Right. So we need to build in a really creative and also thoughtful and sometimes slow way. Yes. You know, so I'll stop there.
I love that so much, Sophia. The health before the tech. Yes, yes, yes. I would say, you know, large scale, I want to see more people listening to people with lived experience, right? I think it really goes with Sophia's by us, for us. We are the ones who've experienced the problems, and we are the ones who best know how to architect the solutions. And then finally, I'll point out two areas and founders I'm really excited about in this space. So we were talking a lot about cultural humility, cultural competence. I'm really excited about Violet, seed stage company by Garang, I have his last name here, Choksky, make sure I get it right. And he's actually working within health plans, health systems to help them assess their provider network for cultural competence and work with them to develop trainings and certifications for cultural competence, which is really exciting. And then an area that I think has been given far too little attention has been health at every size, and really inclusive and affirming care for people in larger bodies. We know that unfortunately people in larger bodies have been so marginalized and really harmed by the current medical system. And we actually know that weight is not a good proxy for health. And in many ways, what we've been doing, encouraging people, you know, this obesity epidemic has had really harmful downstream effects on people in larger bodies, including the development of a lot of eating disorders. So particularly excited about one founder in the space, Michelle Matthews, who is a non-binary person in a larger body who's created a community right now. It's called Very as a platform for weight inclusive care, and really excited to see the takeoff of that.
I love it. I'm going to echo the for us, by us. And I know that our Shock Talk is specifically for, you know, Indigenous folks seeking Indigenous mental health care. However, I would like to see, as other companies try to be more inclusive, that it's not just a check of the box, that when they are trying to be more inclusive, that we actually have a seat at the table, and that we have some bargaining power, and that we have a say in how things are shaped. So I think that's what I want to see, because I understand that you can't only make that some larger systems are going to need more diversity and inclusion in that way, but it can't just be like a moniker or just symbolic, but we actually have to have a seat and be uncomfortable with when we say, no, that doesn't work for our people. So that's what I'm excited to see.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all our panelists for joining. This has been a really interesting and inspiring conversation. I wish we had more time to continue, but I really do appreciate you all sharing your stories and wisdom, and hope that the conversation can keep going into the future.
Thanks so much. Great to be part of this Rockstar panel.
It was amazing to listen to and witness, and I'm just so thankful that you all are in this space with us today and in the tech space. It's really inspiring. And I just want to thank everybody. This is closing out our second annual 2021 Women's Mental Health Conference. And I also wanted to shout out to our in-kind supporter, Mind Up. If you use this QR code, you get 25% off. And I also just want to let you all know about the Whova community. This app will be available for on the web for 3 months and on your phone for 6 months. So please do continue to interact with each other and reach out to each other. You know, we started this community. We want to continue to build it. Thank you so much for everybody who joined us.
Yeah, thank you all very much for coming and for attending WMHC 2021. And I wish I could go to happy hour with all the panelists.
Soon.